Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where between the 10th and 11th of April of 2026 both the Russians and the Ukrainians attacked each other once again using hundreds of drones. I would like to point your attention that at 4 p.m. of the local time the Easter truce will start. But despite the fact that just in several hours the clashes between the Russians and the Ukrainians must stop at least for the next 36 hours, we see that as of the moment, as of the night between the 10th and 11th of April, both the Russians and the Ukrainians continued attacking each other. The Minister of Defense of Ukraine stated that overnight the Russians used 160 drones to attack the territory of Ukraine, and we received lots of videos that confirm the damage that the Russians managed to deal. But the most important thing is the Russians are moving to new tactics. New tactics of the Russian armed forces, Shaheds with operator control. The Russians have begun to use kamikaze drones more actively, which the pilot controls in real time. Now the target of such devices is Ukrainian mobile fire groups. This is a very important situation. Thanks to manual control, attacks are becoming much more accurate. If earlier the Shahed followed only by coordinates, now the operator can maneuver and aim directly at a vehicle or a position of fighters. Accordingly, the risks of Ukrainian units are increasing. So this is a very important situation. The Russians are using machinery view, and this allows the Russians to control drones over the territory of Ukraine. The second important thing from this statement is how exactly the Russians receive a stable signal from these drones. We discussed that recently the Russians began improving their communication along the border with the Republic of Belarus. The Russians most likely improve their communications along the border in Transnistria, and it seems that the Russians began using satellite internet to control their drones over the territory of Ukraine. This allows the Russians to control Iran drones and to change its destination and targets if they discover a position of fire maneuver group of the armed forces of Ukraine. I would like to remind you that several months ago the Ukrainians stated that they managed to stabilize the situation with drones, that they are able to bring them down, but now due to the fact that the Russians are changing their tactics, we see that the Ukrainians began suffering huge problems with this. Another important thing, today the President of Ukraine Zelensky stated that Ukraine has received a new batch of missiles for the Patreot system. He stated that additional missiles arrived in the country recently. Supplies from partners continue despite concerns about the possible shift in US attention to the Middle East. This is a very important statement made by the President of Ukraine Zelensky, because these days and in this stage, in this part of the special military operation, the Western partners, the European countries, don't like to give missiles to Ukraine without any reason. So usually, probably starting from the beginning of 2025, the European countries send missiles, Patriot missiles and Patriot systems to Ukraine only if they know for sure that the Russians are going to attack Ukraine massively using 400-500 of drones and several dozens of missiles. Only just 3 or 4 days before another massive missile strike, the European countries send the missiles and Patriot systems to Ukraine. And this statement made by the President of Ukraine Zelensky means that in coming days the Russians are planning to launch a massive attack. Most likely this massive attack is not going to happen during the next night between the 11th and the 12th of April, and most likely not between the 12th and the 13th of April, but telling the truth, we believe that the massive attack may start either between the 30th and the 14th of April, or maybe even between the 12th and the 13th of April, right after the end of Easter truce. Because there is another pattern of Russian behavior. I would like to point your attention that every time before any other massive attack, massive offensive operation from the Russian side, we can witness massive attacks on the territory of Ukraine. And today we received lots of updates on possible offensive operation from the Russian side that will start right after the end of Easter truce. We will discuss this in a minute. Now let's continue with strikes, and let's talk about the city of Odesa. During the previous 24 hours, according to information we have, the city of Odesa was hit with significant number of drones. Last night, Russia carried out another large-scale Guarantee 2 drone attack on the city of Odesa. At least 25 drones attacked the Odesa cable plant in the city of Odesa, resulting in multiple large fires breaking out. In these pictures and in these videos, we can see the consequences of attack. And I would like to remind you that just yesterday we discussed another attack carried out by Russians. But as for yesterday, the Russians were attacking oil refineries and oil depots on the territory of Odesa region. We discussed this video. So we see that the Russians are over-concentrated on the territory of Odesa region because the main logistic lines and main logistic roads are going through this area, which means that the Russians will continue attacking this territory until the Ukrainians reduce the number of logistics or the level of logistics through this territory. But due to the fact that the Ukrainians don't have any other alternative, we believe that the city of Odesa will be under very heavy fire during the next stage of the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. Few more explosions were recorded on the territory of the city of Sumy. This picture was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and probably that's it about the attacks. Now let's discuss the attacks that were carried out by the Ukrainians. According to information we have, during the previous night between the 10th and 11th of April of 2026, the Ukrainians continued attacking the southern parts, the southern regions of the Russian Federation, the Krasnodar Krai, the city of Novorossiysk, and the territories of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. As you can see, we have lots of icons from this area. During the previous night, we received lots of updates of how Ukrainians were attacking objects of energy infrastructure and logistics of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the southern parts of Zaporizhzhia region. We see that the Russians are conducting Easter regrouping. They're bringing units, they're bringing fuel, they're bringing arms, they're bringing weapons. So that is why the Ukrainians are trying to establish complete control over the territory. And just in this video, we can see how a train was attacked by the armed forces of Ukraine. So we see that the Ukrainians are trying to ruin the Russian logistic before possible Zaporizhzhia offensive operation, which most likely will start right after the end of Easter truce. We will discuss this in a minute. Furthermore, the Ukrainians, according to this video, attacked several hangars, barracks that the Russians were using for accumulation of their forces, units, vehicles, tanks, and infantry fighting carriers. Another important thing that the Russians stated that overnight they destroyed 99 drones, mainly over the Krasnodar region, so in the southern direction. So from the other side, we see that the Ukrainians are trying to destroy as many as possible air defense positions in the southern direction with the purpose to break through the layered air defense of the armed forces of the Russian Federation towards the cities of Novorossiysk and Krasnodar, because the Ukrainians understand that this is one of the most important export site of the Russian Federation, and if Ukrainians are able to establish control over these territories, of course this will reduce Russia's incomes of oil from oil export. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Sumy direction. We received the biggest changes exactly from this area, and these are the changes on the ground. According to information we have, the Russians managed to maintain the lines between the settlements of Yunakivka and Mala-Karchakovka, and according to different mappers, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to answer this big forest which is located between the settlements of Karchakovka and Krapivshina. So we are talking about this huge forest. It seems that the Russians are planning to use this forest as a foothold to concentrate forces before moving further in the southwestern direction and the southeastern direction. From these positions, Russians most likely will attack the villages of Karchakovka, Novosich, and Krapivshina. I would like to remind you that several days ago we received a report that the Russians captured the settlement of Mala-Karchakovka, and now we see that the Russians are over-concentrated to create a Sumy foothold before advancing further in the southern direction, and we see that this process is ongoing. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians improved their positions around the village of Miropolskaya. I would like to remind you that yesterday, according to information we have, the Russians captured the settlement of Miropolskaya, and today several mappers clarified the situation, and we see that the Russians improved their positions around the village itself. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kharkiv direction. The Russians are keeping bombing Ukrainian positions between the cities of Volchansk and the most northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region. So almost every single day we get another video from this area, which means that either the Ukrainians have concentrated their units in this direction with the purpose to stabilize the situation at least for several days and not allow the Russians to break through positions. And from this alliance we understand that the Ukrainians bring additional reinforcements and reserves with the purpose to hold this big forest along the border. So the clashes for this big forest continue. There are very heavy clashes. The Russians are trying to break through Ukraine's defense, and the Ukrainians are trying to stabilize the situation no matter the price they're going to pay for this, because if Russians are able to consolidate the territory's positions along the entire border, including this big forest, Russians will be able to keep advancing further in the southern direction towards the city of Belый Kolodez. Just yesterday we discussed that that explosions were recorded around the Pechenegi Dam. It seems that's right after the end of the Easter truce, we'll see very big activities both from the Russians and the Ukrainian side in this direction. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kupiansk direction. During the previous night, we received changes on the ground. Several neutral mappers reported that the Russians improved their positions significantly to the east of the river Voskol. As you can see, we have some mass in this direction because, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, the entire eastern bank of the river Voskol, at least around the Kupiansk agglomeration, is already under complete or almost under complete control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. But at the same time, the mappers, different mappers, say that this is not the reality, and there is still a big gap between positions under control of Russian side and the river Voskol. Now let's move further. As for the Sloviansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, the sources reported that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to enter the settlement of Alexandrovka. Telling the truth, I'm not sure about these statements made by different sources, because the Russians won't risk with any offensive operation before Easter truce. Most likely, if the Russians are planning to begin offensive in this direction, they will start this offensive only after the Easter truce. So that is why I believe that some speculations were published by different sources without any proofs. The city of Kramatorsk is under very heavy fire. If you remember, just yesterday we discussed that the Russians are trying to establish complete control over the territory to cut the main logistic lines, and this process is ongoing. The Russians are very far from establishing complete fire control over the territory, and furthermore, if Russians want to establish 100% control over the territory, first they need to think about how to improve their positions on the Ukrainian side of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. Maybe the Russians have some plans, but to establish complete control over the city of Kramatorsk and to cut the Kostiantynivka-Sloviansk agglomeration into several pieces, first they need to cross the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal and to capture the villages of Malinovka and Tikhovka. If the Russians are able to do this, only then we can start talking about cutting this territory into smaller pieces. The Kostiantynivka direction. During the previous 24 hours, the changes were recorded around the settlement of Chervona. This video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, pro-Russian source, and here we can see how Russians were attacking the edge positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. I would like to remind you that during the previous days, we received lots of updates from different mappers that the Ukrainians counterattacked in the direction of the city of Chasiv Yar, and it seems that those reports were correct. At least they were partially confirmed, and based on the video we have adjusted the map, and it seems that indeed the Ukrainians, as a result of a counter-offensive operation, recaptured the settlement of Chervona, and based on this video we have adjusted the map. Based on these updates we have clarified the situation on the ground. Another important video is coming from the city of Kostiantynivka. Let's discuss this video in details, and this is how the Ukrainians are trying to improve their drones. In this video we can see a reconnaissance drone of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and we can see a Ukrainian drone that was flying right after. And in this video we can see how a Ukrainian drone takes out its counterpart using small arms. So this is a very interesting video. So this is a small arm, and we can see that the Ukrainian drone attacked the Russian drone just with one bullet, and as a result of attack the Russian drone fell down. So this is a very important video, and this is another branch of a possible development of drone aviation. You know, this technology is just at the beginning of its development, of its progress, but obviously this situation will be improved, because once again the most important thing is not just to produce and to have massive production of drones. The most important thing is to find the solution how to reuse them. If you find the solution how to reuse drones, this will make them cheaper, much cheaper, and this war can be won only by the side who are able to make the war for the state cheaper in comparison with your opponent. And we see that both the Russians and the Ukrainians are trying to follow exactly this doctrine, and they're trying to make their forces much cheaper in comparison with the opponent, which means that most likely both the Russians and the Ukrainians are entering the period of attrition, of total attrition. The Dobropillia direction, additional changes on the ground were recorded in the area of the settlement of Shevchenka. Pro-Ukrainian sources published a video of how they were attacking Russians around the Shachta, around the mine of Vadianskaya, number 2, and which means that the Russians began advancing. And currently the clashes are taking place for this territory. This is a very important mine that can be used by Russians for concentration of their units, for build-up, and then to move further in the direction of the villages of Svetlaya, Vadianska, and Shevchenka. So it seems that the battle has begun, but the Russians will continue this battle only after Easter truce ends. And the most interesting and the most important direction, Zaporizhzhia. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources stated that Ukrainian sources claim that the Russian armed forces are massively deploying armored vehicles to the Zaporizhzhia sector near Huliaipole. More than 50 units of equipment are reported. Russian forces are currently advancing there. So what is happening? Easter truce, the first important thing, which means that neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians will attack each other, and the Ukrainians will not attack the Russian units. The Russians, using the Easter truce, are trying to concentrate a lot of forces around the city of Huliaipole, 50 vehicles, and one thing is clear, that they will try to hide these vehicles. One thing is clear, that when Easter ends, the Russians will carry out massive attacks, probably 2 or 3 or 4 days in a row, with the purpose to destroy completely headquarters, equipment, fuel depots, ammo depots in the Zaporizhzhia direction here. And when the Russians finish these attacks, the Russians will use the concentrated and accumulated forces in the area of the city of Huliaipole with the purpose to break through completely the Ukraine's defense between Huliaipole and the city of Kharkiv, with the purpose to begin the Russian major summer or even late spring and early summer offensive operation. And this situation will start in coming days. We have covered most of the updates regarding the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, but there are 2 more. Let's discuss them also. Pro-Ukrainian sources also published a video from the area of the Kaspian Sea, and according to these videos, according to these updates, the Ukrainians attacked the Russian stations. Ukrainian kamikaze drones hit Russia's and drilling platforms in the Caspian Sea over 1,000 kilometers from the front line. The drones were guided via Starlink. So the Ukrainians are keeping attacking on the Russian export potential and oil, let's say, economy. And you know that today several sources stated that the Russians are soon will be out of money. For example, Zelensky stated that if the current situation continues for another 6 months or 12 months, then the Russians will become bankrupt. Of course, we heard the similar statements at the beginning of the conflict when the Ukrainians were saying that the Russians had missiles just for 3 days or something like this, and now we see similar statements. But the situation has been changed significantly. Now the Russians earn lots of money due to the conflict in the Middle East. Yes, we see that the European countries, NATO countries, the United States of America currently are trying to stabilize the situation in the Middle East, but it seems that it won't work out. For example, during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of updates on this statement. Once again, the President Trump is moving from talks to ultimatums and threats. The Iranians don't seem to realize they have no cards other than a short-term extortion of the world by using international waterways. The only reason they are alive today is to negotiate. So this is threats, not, let's say, compromises. Trump says the results of talks with Iran will be clear in about 24 hours. We're going to know soon. Trump added, we have a reset going. We're loading up the ships with the best ammunition, even at a higher level than we use, to do a complete decimation. So what's exactly the President of the United States of America is talking about? First of all, during this ceasefire period of time, when both the Iranians and the Americans didn't attack each other, don't attack each other, the United States of America reinforced their positions in the Middle East significantly. The US is increasing its military presence in the Middle East. The new fighter jets and assault aircraft have arrived at bases in the region. Despite upcoming negotiations with Iran, the Pentagon continues to build up its military presence. A Pentagon spokesperson confirmed that 1,500 to 2,000 soldiers from the elite 82nd Airborne Division are expected to be deployed to the region in coming days. Furthermore, we are receiving updates about huge air traffic. C-5M Super Galaxy and C-17A Globemaster III transport aircraft are actively flying from the Middle East and back. The United States of America is actively replenishing supplies and deploying reinforcements to the region, taking advantage of the ceasefire with Iran. Another important article was published by different media. It's interesting that while US is playing diplomacy in Pakistan, after the onset of ceasefire, more than 70 military transport aircraft landed in the Middle East within a day only. So, which means that maybe there is a negotiation process, but obviously we see that after this ceasefire, the United States of America will leave the negotiation process much stronger. And another important thing, today we received a very interesting article that US crude oil exports are soaring. Crude oil export from the United States Gulf Coast are forecast for average record 4.90 million barrels per day in April based on current supplies. This would be a 23% increase and a 30% increase in comparison with February. So we see that the United States of America is also a country, state in the world as the Russians, who earns lots of money on the conflicts in the Middle East when talking about oil export, which means that the United States of America can continue the epic fury operation in the Middle East until it's reached its objectives. Furthermore, we know that the main problem for the negotiation process was the Lebanon and its sale, and today we received lots of updates on this matter. After a call with Trump, Netanyahu changed Israel's strike policy in Lebanon. From now on, every strike in Beirut requires special approvals, including Netanyahu's personal sign-off. At the same time, we see that the Israeli army is preparing for the possibility of a collapse of the talks between Washington and Tehran and resumption of talks. If no substantial agreement is reached, we will be forced to return to Iran once again. At the same time, we see that the European countries are increasing pressure on Israel, and today we have reports about the very bad relations between Spain, France, and Israel. And now the Pakistan, the state of Pakistan, where the negotiation process are planned to take place today. So we have report that J.D. Vance have already arrived on the territory of Pakistan. We have a report about the fact that the Iranian delegation has also arrived in Pakistan. We have lots of updates on this matter. And the most important, we have the negotiation delegations in Pakistan. The United States of America will be represented by J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and Brad Cooper. The Iranian side would be represented by Bahir Kalibaf, Abbas Arachi, Takht Ravanchi, and Bagir Zalnghar. So these people will talk today, but the sources are saying that conversation is going to be will be indirect. Americans and Iranians will sit in separate rooms, and Iran will not allow the US to have a photo op with J.D. Vance and the Iranian officials. So today is a very important day, and most likely today we will understand whether the parties are going to return back to the conflict in the Middle East. But due to massive build-up from the US side, due to the fact that the Israelis are still very far to finish the buffer zone in the southern parts of Lebanon, there are very high chances that the clashes will resume. And that's it for the short video. The Military with Summary channel reminds us to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.